Of God's Word that we're going to focus on for a little bit this morning is from the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 4. There it says, "What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now, to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. It was not through the law that Abraham and his offspring received the promise that he would be heir of the world, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. For if those who depend on the law are heirs, faith means nothing, and the promise is worthless. Because the law brings wrath, and where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore, the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace, and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not." This is God's word. Friends, there's a movie from 1989, so maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't, but it's Christmas Vacation, and the main character, Clark Griswold, the main point of the movie really is him waiting for this Christmas bonus that he's expecting to get from his company. And he's worked there for a while, so he knows what to expect from this Christmas bonus. He knows to expect a big fat check for a decent amount of money, it seems like, for this bonus. So the whole movie, he's waiting for it. And then toward the end, you find out what his plans are. And his plans are he's going to take the money from this bonus and put it in a swimming pool at his house. So pretty exciting. But it takes a long time, and the bonus isn't coming, and it's getting closer to Christmas, and so it's kind of nerve-wracking for him. But toward the end of the movie, they deliver something from his work, and it's an envelope, so he's thrilled to see that the bonus finally is here. And so he has this envelope, and this is a little kind of a weird colored picture of that scene, but so he gets this envelope, and he sort of spills the beans to the whole family that, all right, I'm planning, I didn't want to tell you guys this sort of thing, but I'm gonna put in a swimming pool with the money. And he even tells them, to make sure that we could get the pool in the ground when the snow thaws, he wrote, checks to the contractor or whatever it was already, and he doesn't have the money to pay for that check until he gets the bonus. So he was a little nervous, but he said, he's thankful it's here. And then so he's talking about that envelope there, and eventually he opens it, and you sort of see his face drop because it's not a big fat check. It is, in fact, a one-year membership to the Jelly of the Month Club. And that is not, to put it mildly, that's not what he was hoping for, right? He wanted the money. He's still in trouble, and he's getting a new can of jelly, I guess, every month. But the part of it that makes me laugh the hardest is always what Cousin Eddie next to him says when he reveals it, and about that Jelly of the Month Club, he says, that's the gift that keeps on giving the whole year. And Eddie was really excited about that gift. Clark was not very excited about that gift. And I think about it for us. Yeah, things didn't work out for Clark in the story. And in our lives, yeah, we have ups and downs, certainly. Maybe not as funny or dramatic as in a movie like this. But some things go our way, and we're happy about it. And some other things absolutely don't go our way. But as Christians, sometimes we can hold out and say, okay, things may not have gone my way, but at least I've got my faith. Right? And that's something that Christians will sometimes say, like, okay, I've got my faith, so I'm good. But what does that really mean? I've got my faith. Because sometimes we think about that. We know it's supposed to sound good. We know we're supposed to be very comforted with the fact that we have our faith. But sometimes we struggle a bit to say, well, what does that really mean, though, when I'm struggling? After all, faith is wonderful. I mean, we can think, okay, I'm pretty sure there's something about moving mountains in the Bible about it, and Again, I know it's supposed to be a comfort, but then you start counting the things that happen in your life and you realize, well, faith doesn't necessarily pay the bills when they come in. Or faith doesn't fix a marriage that's in trouble. Or faith doesn't cure an illness when someone's sick or someone is dying. And all of a sudden, all these things in our life, we might start to wonder, what good was that faith again? Because we can forget. And then we might even sort of wonder, why is God letting these things happen? I thought I had faith and things were supposed to go better for me. So if you've ever had even an inkling of these kind of thoughts, hopefully today can be a chance to remind ourselves what our faith is, why it's important, and what are some of the many things that God is really doing through that. And hopefully it's a comfort for us, because it is faith, not a Jelly of the Month club, that we are going to say it really is the gift that keeps on giving. Now, as we talk about this, we're going to look at that passage that I read just before we started today, looking at Romans chapter 4, and kind of the main character who gets talked about there, again, is Abraham. So we're talking about Abraham. He's one of those Old Testament heroes of the faith, and we heard a little bit in our first Bible reading today about him. See, he's one of those ones where his faith really seemed impressive. Right? His faith, his trust in what God said to him, it was pretty impressive. That first reading that we did, if you're thinking of that, when I read it, you realize God told them, all right, pick up your life. You're 75 years old, but pick up your life, move to a place you've never been, start a whole new life somewhere else, and go do that. And Abraham did. Right? He was still called Abram then, but he did it. He picked up and he went. And then later on, these more amazing things where God says, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham and his wife were old. And his wife even laughed at the idea, like, thinking I can have a kid. But Abraham believed God. He trusted that it was actually going to happen. Later on, when he actually had that son, Isaac, and God says, okay, that kid that you love and that was a literal miracle child, I want you to take him to a mountain, put him on an altar, and perform a human sacrifice and kill him on that altar. Now, I think anyone would be right to say, wait a minute. But again, God commanded him to do it. So Abraham, the next morning, early in the morning, starts setting off to that mountain. And, of course, thankfully, God stopped him, and he did not command him to go through with this sacrifice. But Abraham, again, he had him to the point where his son was on the altar. I mean, you talk about someone's faith and putting it into practice. We're just kind of in awe at the things that Abraham, God says something and he believes it and he listens and he does it. So it's interesting when our text starts talking about Abraham. Now this is many years after Abraham had lived, talking about him. It's interesting how it talks about his faith as not necessarily being something to brag about. So we hear that in these words. What then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, discovered in this matter? If in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. So when we're saying, boy, Abraham's faith looks impressive with the way that he puts it into practice, he does these amazing things, but look at what this verse says. If, in fact, Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What that's saying is the things Abraham did aren't really the main thing here. Right? The actual works that he did, as impressive as they may look to us, he said he didn't have anything to brag about to God for those things, because the important part wasn't what he did, it was what he believed. And it was his faith trusting those things. And it kind of goes on to explain that a little more. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now we'll get, in a couple minutes, we'll get to this whole credited as righteousness thing and see what's going on there. But again, the main part here is Abraham believed God. The important thing that Abraham did wasn't so much what he did. It was important what he believed. Again, it comes out again. Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but as an obligation. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. So we hear that credited thing again. Again, we'll get to that. But again, it's pointing at the important thing wasn't what he did. It was something that he didn't do, but that he believed. Right? So to the one who does not work, so it's not what he did, it wasn't his work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly. Now, last week I talked about that word justify and how it means, it's like a courtroom term that means declare not guilty. So Abraham, the point of this is saying that Abraham couldn't stand before God and say, God, you should find me not guilty because I've done some amazing things in my faith. God would say, no, he hasn't done enough. He's still a sinner. Sorry, you're still guilty. But no, the best thing about Abraham wasn't what he did. It was his faith, that he trusts God. And the whole point of this is getting to the point of something that was true for Abraham, and it's true for us, and that we've said several times already, but I'm trying to make the point clear, that faith is a gift. Right? Faith is not something that we do. It's something that's given to us. Now it's one of those things that it sort of makes sense, but at the same time it feels like, but I sort of have to do it, right? And in a way, I mean, in faith, who's doing the believing? Well, I'm doing the believing. But the point is, we couldn't do that believing if God didn't put that believing in our hearts. And that was true for Abraham, and it's true for us. Right? Because Abraham is one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly. Now you think about what this looks like for us. All right, Abraham's faith was impressive, and we think about our faith. Do the things that follow from our faith, would they look impressive to someone on the outside? And maybe they would. But if you're like me, you can probably think of times in your life where your reaction to difficulties or your reaction to troubles in your life was not an amazing feat of faith that followed from that, but maybe it was something else entirely. For example, when something happens, when we're struggling with something, it could be anything. You think, what's our instinct? Is our instinct to run to God, to look to God first for help, to say, He is going to be my strength in this. He is the one who is going to get me out of this no matter what. Maybe it is, but again, if you're like me, unfortunately, that's not always where I go first, right? And maybe you're like that too, where instead of running to God right away, maybe you go to yourself and say, okay, I got myself into this maybe, or maybe you didn't, but I'm going to get myself out of this some way or another. And that's kind of a dangerous place to go, because on one hand, maybe you do find a way out of it. And then you have that dangerous place of thinking, yeah, I did pretty good. I guess I am pretty good at this whole life thing. I'm doing all right. So that could get you in trouble later. Or it doesn't go so well, you fail, and then you're just ready to throw up your hands. And have you gotten to that point ever in your life where you just want to say, I just want to give up for a while? There's that phrase that sometimes people use today, I don't want to adult today, where you use adult as a verb. And it's usually this thing where, okay, people who are old enough to be adults, we know we have responsibilities and we have lots of important things we have to do, but we just don't want to do them. We just want to take a break from them. And sometimes that sort of just becomes our way of life. When we have to, we do certain things, but then we just want to numb ourselves from it all. Right? And we can do that in plenty of different ways, and you know which way is more likely for you. But for example, we can numb ourselves, watching the next TV show. And when Netflix asks, are you still watching? Of course, yes, I'm still watching, and I plan to continue. Thank you very much. Or, again, looking at the next bit of content on your device of choice as you just, again, numb yourself to the world. Or, again, we can do it with food. We can numb ourselves that way. We can do it with alcohol. We can numb ourselves by saying, what's the next purchase that I can make for this some new thing that I can buy? And that, finally, we probably don't say this, but maybe we think it, that will make me happy. That will fill up this sort of empty feeling that I have inside me. And we know it doesn't work. And so there's a part of us that thinks, if that's what it is to have faith, we think, I'm a believer and I still live this way? Could faith really be anything? Is faith anything more than just a nice word that sounds good, that we kind of throw out there to just kind of toss the word out there, but it doesn't mean anything? Is it just kind of a jelly of the month club that isn't worth it at the end of the day? But it's not. It's huge, and it all comes back to this point, which may be obvious, and maybe we could just sort of agree and move on, but faith is a gift. And that's so important for us, especially when we realize at times how the actions that follow our faith don't always match what our faith is. When we fall into those traps and we're not trusting God, we're not putting 100% trust in Him, where instead of going into despair, we can realize the truth that faith is a gift, and that in that case we are being one who does not work but trusts God, who justifies the ungodly. That God gave us faith not because of how good we were, not because He saw that, I see that you'll be one who will always live out your faith perfectly. No, He gave it to us because He loves us, not because of who we were, not because of how good we would be. He gave it to us as a gift that had nothing to do with us. Right? It wasn't something that we did that God said, okay, now I'll give you faith, now that you've proven worthy. No. And in fact, we're not worthy. Abraham wasn't worthy either. It's sort of the secret here that if you read more of Abraham's story, he messed up all the time too. But when we sin, we go back to the God who gave us faith, and He said He loved me enough anyway to make me a believer. That's huge, and that's just the beginning of it. Because just the fact that we have faith, if that was all it was to say, well, yeah, I believe what God says, I have that faith in my heart. That's amazing, but it's what that faith then, what God does through that faith that gets even more and more amazing. And that's kind of the other point, is that, yes, faith is a gift, but faith also receives more gifts. And that's where we get the gift that keeps on giving, right? Because it's a gift that brings more gifts with it. And this is maybe kind of a weird concept to think of, how can one gift bring more gifts? And I get, okay, one type of jelly one month and then another the next month, but again, this is better than that. So the way I like to explain this is thinking of how we get our water. All right, so I looked for a picture of the Burnsville Water Tower, and this is what I came up with. I cannot verify that there's water in here, but let's assume there is, okay? And let's assume, for the sake of argument, that if you're in Burnsville, all your water comes from this. I'm sure it doesn't exactly work that way, but just go with me on this, all right? So you're getting your water from the water tower, but how do you get it? Right? I mean, we read that reading of Jesus at the well of Samaria. Back then, you had to go to the well, you had to have a bucket of something and get it down the well and get your water. But today, we don't have to, if you're living in Burnsville, you don't have to make a trek to the water tower with a bucket and then bring it back. So how does it get to you? Well, the city of Burnsville, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to make a gift to you of pipes. Okay, now it's not really a gift. Someone told me after the first service, we pay taxes on that kind of stuff. And okay, you get that there's a limit to this picture. But so all right, so they give you pipes, and the pipes carry the water. All right, so the one gift is the pipe, but that gift gives more gifts, right? Because they're not just pipes. That'd be kind of who wants this? But through that pipe, lo and behold, almost like magic, you open your faucet and water comes out. You turn on the hose and you get water. All right, we take it for granted, but it gets to us when we need it. Now, the trickier part is to make that connection back to what we're talking about with faith. All right, so God has given us faith as a gift. But that's not the only gift that He gives us, and He gives it through faith. Okay, so again, we're talking about Abraham, and He said it was not through the law that Abraham and his offspring received the promise that he would be heir of the world, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. So again, it wasn't that Abraham did all the right things. Again, we gave some examples of where he showed his faith in a great way, but that's not the main point here. The main point was what he believed. And remember, faith is a gift, but look what comes along with it. He did this through the righteousness that comes by faith. And remember, it had come up in the early verses about being credited as righteousness. And so this is what we're talking about here, that that we have faith, but then righteousness comes through that faith. So, okay, what is this righteousness? Righteousness is that's like perfection or being right with God. And again, even Abraham, as impressive as he was not perfect. He did not have natural righteousness. He sinned all the time. Again, read through Genesis. He messed up plenty. And so do we. We're not perfect. Only one person was perfect, and that's Jesus. And thank God he was, right? Because it's his righteousness, Jesus' perfection, that God says, I'm going to give you that, but it's going to come through your faith. All right? So just like everything Jesus did, his perfect life, his death on the cross, everything he did, that's sort of like, that's the stuff that's in the water tower, so to speak, right? And for it to get to us, God gives us faith. It's kind of like the pipes. Follow me here, okay? He gives us this faith, and then through that faith, he gives us this other stuff like Jesus' righteousness. Now again, this is big because, again, even on his best day, Abraham could not have stood before God and say, all right, God, let me into heaven now. I'm perfect. No, even on his best day, even on the day when he put his son on that altar and even on that day, he was not perfect enough. And same with us. On our best day, right, when things are clicking and we did everything right, we're still not good enough. But God has given us faith. And through that faith, he has given us Jesus' righteousness. So now, we are good enough, right? We don't have to have this I'm not good enough sort of self-esteem complex in our heads when it comes to our relationship with God, because we have God esteem or something like that, right? Because we have Jesus' perfection. His righteousness is now ours, right? So do we sin? Yes, and we do acknowledge that like we do every service, but we're turning to Jesus for forgiveness, and we're rejoicing that that's exactly what he's given us, right? We stand before God not as this horrible sinner who needs to get smote or smitten, one of those two things where God is going to punish us, right? No, we stand before God as perfect. We're his holy people. We have his absolute righteousness covering us because Jesus did it. And that comes to us through faith. And that's not the only thing that comes through that faith. We have a different kind of belonging with him. And we see that in a later verse in our text. Therefore, the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring. Not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. Now, these words may not sound like as big a deal to us now, but back in Old Testament days and at the time the Apostle Paul wrote this, what your family tree was a huge deal. Because the Jews, the people who are of Abraham's actual family tree, they were God's people, right? The Savior came through him. And so there could be this thought of, so wait, if I can't trace my ancestry back to Abraham, am I out of luck? It might sound silly to us now, but that's a huge thing, that we have this belonging to God's people that is outside of what our genetic family tree says. Because what does it say there? Whoops. Go back. What does it say there? Not only those who are of the law, but also those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. We can say that we are part of Abraham's family, whether or not you could trace your heritage back to Abraham or not, because we're part of his faith. So we have this belonging and connectedness. We are God's people, right? And you can think about that, where even our earthly families, sometimes there's problems. Even in the best cases, there's problems among families, and we see how sin plays itself out. And in some cases, someone doesn't feel like they belong sometimes because of that friction in their family, and it can be hard. But God says that I've brought you into my family, and that family actually is perfect. Now, I get this side of heaven, there's problems, right? And I don't say this to minimize any of the things that I mentioned earlier in the service that we struggle through. But God's gifts to us of our faith, of the righteousness of Jesus, of that connection we have to his family, thank God that those things do not depend on if we're doing good or doing not so good in our lives at that moment. Because whatever our outside circumstances, what God has done for us by faith, it doesn't change. Nothing can take that away from us because God's given it to us when we don't deserve it. Right? So none of us would probably sign up for a Jelly of the Month club. Maybe you love jelly. I don't know. But it doesn't seem worth it for most people. But this gift of faith, do not take this for granted. Do not miss what God is really giving you. That He's given you this not because you deserve it, not because you were so great or you were you were the right kind of person or you fit in just the right way. He gave it to you because He loves you. And He connected you to Jesus, who gave you even more, who covered you in His righteousness, who brought you in to His family. Let's rejoice in our faith. Let's live out that faith and rejoice that that's a gift that keeps on giving. Amen.